Alright everyone, now it's time for the Occult, video 394, Havana Syndrome. Big in the news right now. You've got a new report actually talking about how it might be the result of Russia harassing people in Cuba. What happened, of course, is that people at the embassy in Cuba began to experience neurological problems, ringing in the ears and confusion, general mental haziness, headaches, and things like that. And it was systemic enough that there were multiple theories put forward. And the reason why this is in the Occult playlist is some of those theories have to do with like witchcraft, Santeria, and things like that. I've seen people say, well, you know, the Cubans decided to bewitch the people at the embassy because they're communists and so they didn't like them there. Maybe, maybe not. There are competing explanations. The earliest one, of course, was that it was some sort of sonic weapon that was being deployed by the Cubans, actually, by the Cuban government against the embassy. This is in the wake of the semi-normalization, actually, of relations between the United States and Cuba. So, some degree of trade and travel, the lifting of the ban on Cuban rum, which, you know, I wouldn't mind trying some of that. I have a feeling that it's pretty good. It's Cuban, after all. Cuba does some things better than other countries. Not governance, of course. You'll remember when Fidel Castro died, the pickup truck that was toting his casket actually broke down. If you want old model cars that are in tip-top shape, well, Cuba's probably a great place to go for those. If you want good food, my dad was stationed actually there in Cuba for a while when he was in the U.S. Marines, and he talks a big game about their seafood specifically. I wouldn't mind visiting Cuba, although I don't know if it would be safe for me to do so because of my particular political views, my rather acerbic stance on communism in general. To be clear, I have no problem with Cubans themselves. Actually, they're pretty based. The Cuban community of dissidents, when they come to Florida, they ain't exactly voting far left. There's probably a reason for that. So you've got multiple theories. The first one was that it was some sort of sonic weapon deployed by the Cubans specifically, the Cuban government. Then they said, well, no, it's actually a species of cicada that lives on the island, and the frequencies, when they're swarming, the frequencies which emanate from them can cause neurological impact. The problem is that if that were the explanation, if the scientific explanation of it's just, you know, entomology were true, then you would expect local residents to suffer similar effects. You wouldn't expect it just to be embassy staff, so that really never held weight. At the time I was like, oh, maybe, but, you know, there's a plethora of problems with the explanation. Another explanation, the one they're talking about now, according to new reports after years of study, is that it was Russians, actually, and they do have a lot of ties to Cuba. And the thought is, well, the Cuban government wouldn't necessarily be able to assemble a weapon capable of doing that to the embassy staff, and it obviously was directed in nature. And so Russia must have been involved. They created a neurologically disturbing sonic weapon, maybe infrasound or something like that, and then they shipped it to Cuba and aimed it at the embassy, and they were chuckling the whole time in Russian. So it was ya 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 instead of ha ha ha, basically. I don't know that that particular explanation also makes full sense. Why would you bother? You know, there's a limited diplomatic agreement between the U.S. and Cuba and a semi-normalization. Nothing else really changed, though. There's still a bunch of embargoes, and I think Trump restored some of them. And so, I mean, there's limited trade, limited travel, a limited diplomatic presence, and so it never really makes... And none of the explanations actually make full sense when you think about it. The cicada thing doesn't make sense because you've got no outbreak of neurological disorders among Cubans in the area, in the immediate area. The Russian explanation doesn't make full sense because, like, number one, it's like Russia, and it gets into the diplomatic Cold War intrigue too, and that's kind of overlapped with the occult. The Cold War thing sort of is a post-World War II era movements by both the East and West blocs are sort of predicated partially on what they learned from the Nazis. In the West under Operation Paperclip, and in the East Bloc having absorbed a number of Nazi scientists as well. This starts the space program and modern psyops and the jet engine, and all of these things actually, they come from Nazi Germany, and a lot of people don't seem to understand that. Look up Operation Paperclip if you don't believe me. Yeah, we wouldn't have gone to the moon if it weren't for a bunch of Nazis, actually. Von Braun and others. Havana Syndrome remains, though, an enigma because there's no central explanation for it. And so, you know, the argument that it was the result of evil witchcraft or something like that, basically, makes as much sense as cicadas or Cubans or Russians when you think about it. It could also be, of course, something chemical, some sort of chemical leak that they never detected at the embassy. Could be some sort of experiment by the United States on its own embassy staff, too, for both diplomatic and test purposes. Look up MKUltra. We've done it before. We've deliberately infected people with syphilis and injected people with the radioactive isotopes without their consent or knowledge, and dragged people off the streets for human experiments on a number of occasions, you see. The United States does not have its hands clean when it comes to medical and psychological testing. They've done a number of things with regards to the Ritalin era. Do you think that we weren't necessarily test rodents for various drugs? I think that we were. I think that I was part of that. I was on Ritalin for an extended period of time. So, yeah, it could be the United States testing on its own embassy staff, because they're like, well, we only have semi-normalization here, and diplomatically it's convenient to do this because then we can complain about Cuba and maybe re-embargo them, because maybe there's a problem behind the scenes, drug running or something. So we'll do that. Maybe it was Cuba. Maybe it was Russia. Maybe it was cicadas, or maybe it was some devil worshipper practicing Santeria or something along those lines, a voodoo practitioner down in Havana. We're not 100% sure. It remains a complete enigma. That's why it's interesting. The best mysteries are those that are left unsolved, by the way. That's about all. Peace out.